Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Damian Black flicked his cigarette into the pristine white corridor of Galactic Intelligence Headquarters, watching with satisfaction as the cleaning drone scrambled to catch it before it hit the floor. The year 3157 had brought humanity many technological advances, but nothing could replace the simple pleasure of annoying maintenance systems. Agent Black. Director Garp's hologram materialized beside him, her stern expression flickering slightly. Your juvenile attempts to disrupt our cleaning protocols are noted. Again. Keeps them sharp, Damian said, running a hand through his dark hair. What's so urgent it couldn't wait until after my vacation? Vacation? Garp's hologram walked through a wall, reappearing in front of him. The one you've taken 3 times this month? Time tourism is legal now, he shrugged, pulling out another cigarette. Besides, the 1920s have the best jazz. We have a situation. Garp's image gestured and the corridor transformed into a tactical display room. Stars and galaxies swirled around them as she continued. The Phantom has surfaced again. Damian's hand froze halfway to lighting his cigarette. The Phantom, the most notorious temporal terrorist in the galaxy. Thought that was just a ghost story to scare rookie agents. 3 quantum vaults breached in the past week. Security protocols bypassed as if they never existed. And this. Garp waved her hand and a series of images appeared. Shattered time locks, frozen guard stations, and at each scene, a single purple flower left behind. Cute calling card, Damian said, finally lighting his cigarette. But why me? I'm not exactly known for my subtle approach. Because Garp's hologram stepped closer, her pixels briefly disrupting around Damian's smoke. All evidence points to Kronos 7. Now that got his attention. Kronos 7 was off-limits to everyone, even high-ranking agents like himself. The Purple Planet, as it was commonly known, had been under quarantine for centuries. The mountain, he said quietly. Yes. Garp's image flickered again. Our sources indicate the Phantom is searching for something there. Something that could destabilize the entire temporal framework of the Empire. The woman in chains, Damian mused. I always thought that was just another myth. Ren Vision is very real, Agent Black, and if the Phantom reaches her first. Garp let the sentence hang in the air. Damian took a long drag from his cigarette, watching the smoke curl through the holographic star systems. So you want me to go to a forbidden planet, climb a legendary mountain and what? Chat up some ancient prisoner. We want you to get there first, assess the situation, and if necessary. Garp's hologram straightened, her expression hardening. Terminate the threat. Which threat? Damian asked, though he already knew the answer. Both. The tactical room dissolved back into the white corridor. Garp's hologram began to fade, but her voice remained clear. Your temporal coordinates have been uploaded. The mission begins immediately. Always wanted to meet a legend, Damian muttered, crushing his cigarette under his boot. This time, no drone rushed to clean it up. The transport pod materialized on Kronos 7's surface with a crack of displaced air. Damian stepped out, his boots crunching on purple crystalline soil. The atmosphere shimmered with an otherworldly violet haze, and 2 moons hung low on the horizon, their surfaces webbed with glowing temporal fissures. Lovely vacation spot, he muttered, activating his environmental scanner. The readings made him whistle low. The entire planet was saturated with chronon particles, the building blocks of time itself. No wonder the Empire had quarantined it. The legendary mountain loomed before him, its peak disappearing into the violet clouds. Unlike the jagged formations surrounding it, this one was perfectly smooth, as if carved by an artist rather than nature. His scanner went haywire as he approached its base. Getting some interesting readings here, Control, he said into his comm unit. Static answered him. Of course, the chronon concentration would disrupt standard communications. He was on his own. Damien pulled out his grappling gear and began the ascent. The mountain's surface was warm to the touch, almost alive. As he climbed higher, he could have sworn he heard whispers in the wind, fragments of conversations from other times, other realities. 2 hours into the climb, he found the first evidence that he wasn't alone. Fresh climbing spikes embedded in the mountain's surface, still gleaming. The phantom had been here recently, very recently. Amateur, Damien smirked, noting how the spikes formed an obvious trail. Either the legendary spy was getting sloppy or his instinct screamed a warning. He swung to the side just as an energy blast scorched the spot where he'd been hanging. "I was wondering when you'd notice," a voice called from above. "Getting slow in your old age, Agent Black?" Damien looked up to see a figure in a stealth suit perched on a ledge 20 meters above. The suit's camouflage flickered, revealing glimpses of advanced tech beneath. "The Phantom, I presume?" Damien called back, carefully adjusting his position. "Love the outfit. Very mysterious." "This doesn't concern you," the figure replied. "Go back to your temporal tourism. I hear the 1920s are lovely this time of year." Damien's eyes narrowed. That was too specific to be a lucky guess. "You've been watching me." "Among others." The Phantom stood, and Damien caught a better glimpse of the suit. It wasn't just advanced, it was impossible. The technology looked decades ahead of anything the Empire had. "Like to stay ahead of the curve, don't you?" Damien said, slowly reaching for his weapon. "Don't." The Phantom's voice carried a note of something almost like concern. "You'll just waste energy you'll need for the climb. And trust me, you'll need it." With that, the figure disappeared, not with the flash of a teleporter, but with the subtle ripple of someone stepping sideways through time itself. "Show off," Damien muttered, but his mind was racing. The Phantom could have killed him easily, but chose not to. Why? He continued his ascent with greater caution, noting how the air grew thinner and the whispers in the wind grew louder. The purple haze thickened around him until visibility dropped to mere meters. Finally, the mist parted, revealing a plateau near the mountain's peak. And there, bathed in the light of the twin moons, he saw her, Ren Vision. The legends hadn't done her justice. Her skin was a deep, rich violet that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Ancient chains of an unknown metal bound her to the mountain's surface, yet she appeared to be sleeping peacefully, as if the centuries of imprisonment were nothing more than a brief nap. Damien approached slowly, his training warring with an inexplicable urge to rush forward. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. Something about her seemed familiar. "Well," he said aloud, partly to break the eerie silence, "I can see why they put you up here. The view must be spectacular." To his shock, Ren's eyes opened. They were the color of starlight. "You always did have a terrible sense of timing, Damien Black," she said, her voice carrying traces of amusement despite centuries of disuse. Damien froze. "We've never met." "No?" She smiled, and something in his chest tightened. "Then why are you here?" "I'm tracking a temporal terrorist known as the Phantom," he said, maintaining his professional demeanor despite his growing unease. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" "The Phantom," she repeated, as if tasting the words. "Is that what they're calling you now?" "Calling me? I'm not—" "Touch me," she interrupted, "and all your questions will be answered." "That's a terrible pickup line," Damien said automatically, but he found himself moving closer. "Is it?" Her smile widened. "It worked the last time." Warning bells rang in Damien's mind, but they seemed distant, unimportant. He reached out, his fingers inches from her violet skin. "Should I be worried that you seem to know me?" he asked, hesitating at the last moment. You should be worried that you don't know yourself, Ren replied. Her eyes held galaxies. But don't worry, you will. Damien's fingers made contact with her cheek. The chains exploded into dust. Reality cracked. And somewhere in the violet haze, the Phantom watched as another timeline began to unravel. Reality fractured like a broken mirror, and Damien's memories shattered with it. Images flooded his mind, himself in different timelines, different versions, all converging on this moment. He saw himself as the Phantom, methodically dismantling the Empire's temporal controls. He saw countless missions to this mountain, each ending with Ren's touch, each creating a new branch in time's endless tree. "What the hell did you do to me?" he gasped, stumbling backward as Ren stepped away from the mountain wall, the ancient chains now nothing but dust at her feet. "I didn't do anything," she said, stretching like someone waking from a long nap. Her violet skin seemed to absorb the moonlight. "You did this to yourself. About, oh, 17 times now?" 17? Damien's head throbbed. He reached for a cigarette with shaking hands, but Ren plucked it from his fingers before he could light it. "Bad habit," she said, tossing it over the cliff. "You'll quit in timeline 23. Or was it 24? You're saying I'm the Phantom." It wasn't a question. The memories were still flooding in, each more impossible than the last. Among other things, Ren walked to the edge of the plateau, her movements graceful despite centuries of imprisonment. "You're also the agent hunting the Phantom, the temporal terrorist who tried to stop the Phantom, and in one particularly interesting timeline, a jazz musician in 1924. "That was a good timeline," another voice said, and Damien spun to find himself. The other Damien wore the Phantom stealth suit, now deactivated, until the temporal police showed up at our gig in Chicago. "This is impossible," Damien said, drawing his weapon. "Says the man pointing a gun at himself," the Phantom him smirked. "Really? We're doing this again?" Before Damien could respond, alarms blared across the purple sky. Imperial ships broke through the clouds, their temporal drives warping the air around them. "Right on schedule," Ren sighed. She turned to both Damiens. "Gentlemen, I suggest we continue this family reunion somewhere less conspicuous, unless you'd both like to explain to the Empire why there are two of you." "Three, actually," said another voice, and a third Damien stepped out of the temporal distortion, this one wearing an Imperial Admiral's uniform. "And I'm afraid I can't let any of you leave." The Admiral Damien raised his hand, and temporal enforcement squads began materializing around the plateau. "Well," Ren said, stepping between the three Damiens with an amused smile, "this is either going to be very interesting or very messy, possibly both." "Stand down, Agent Black," Admiral Damien commanded, his voice carrying the weight of Imperial authority. "That includes you too, Phantom, and, well, me, I suppose." "You know that's not going to happen," Phantom Damien said, his stealth suit humming to life. "It never does." Agent Damien's head spun as he tried to process the situation. Three versions of himself, each from different points in the timeline, all converging around this mysterious, violet woman who seemed to find the whole situation entertaining. Can someone explain what's actually happening here? He kept his weapon raised, unsure which version of himself to target. "Short version?" Ren stepped closer to him, her presence somehow steadying the chaos in his mind. "You're caught in a temporal loop of your own making. Every time you touch me, it creates a new timeline. Every timeline creates a new you, and every you eventually becomes obsessed with either protecting me or containing me. That's the short version? The long version involves quantum mechanics and a rather embarrassing incident at a temporal jazz club," she winked. The enforcement squads moved closer, their chronon disruptors aimed at the group. Admiral Damien stepped forward. Ren Vision, by order of the Galactic Empire, you are under arrest for temporal manipulation and reality destabilization. Really? Ren raised an eyebrow. And how many times has that worked for you, Damien? Or should I count the temporal fractures your previous attempts have caused? Admiral Damien's face tightened. This time will be different. It's always different, Phantom Damien laughed. That's the problem. Without warning, he activated his suit's temporal drive. The air twisted around him as he phased between moments of time, appearing behind the enforcement squad. In seconds, half the squad was down, their weapons scattered across the plateau. Agent Damien found himself moving without thinking, muscle memory from futures he hadn't lived yet guiding his actions. He rolled behind a crystalline formation as temporal blast erupted around them. Having fun yet? Ren appeared beside him, somehow untouched by the chaos. This is insane, he said, firing at what he hoped wasn't himself. Why would I create a temporal loop? What's the point? Love makes people do crazy things, she said simply, especially when it's spread across multiple timelines. Before he could process that bombshell, Admiral Damien's voice cut through the firefight. Initiate Protocol Omega, temporal containment field now. The air solidified around them as reality itself began to crystallize. Phantom Damien's suit sparked and failed as the temporal field trapped them all in a single moment. No! Ren's voice carried genuine fear for the first time. If you collapse all the timelines here, you'll create a paradox cascade. Better a cascade than letting you continue to exist outside of time, Admiral Damien said grimly. This ends now. Does it? Ren smiled, and something in her expression made Agent Damien's heart skip. She reached for his hand. Care to dance, my love? One more time. Their fingers touched. The world exploded in violet light. When Damien's vision cleared, they were no longer on the mountain. They stood in what appeared to be an ancient temple, its walls covered in temporal equations and diagrams. Phantom Damien materialized beside them, his suit repair systems already adapting to the change. The Chrono Temple, he said, looking around. Clever girl. He can't follow us here. Not yet, Ren agreed. But he will. He always does. Agent Damien stared at the walls, recognition dawning as he read the equations. I wrote these, he whispered. All of these. They're the fundamental principles of temporal manipulation, but they won't be discovered for another century. Unless someone from the future went back and left them for themselves to find, Ren said softly, creating a bootstrap paradox that would eventually lead to the creation of the Temporal Control Division of the Galactic Empire. Which would later imprison you on that mountain, Phantom Damien added, to prevent exactly what's happening now. Agent Damien's memories were aligning now, past and future blending into an impossible tapestry. I did all this. For you? No. Ren touched his cheek, her violet skin warm against his. You did it for us, every version of you trying to find a way to break the cycle without destroying the timeline. And how's that working out? He asked dryly. Well, considering there are now 3 of you running around, she grinned. I'd say it's complicated. The temple walls trembled as reality rippled around them. Admiral Damien was trying to break through. We don't have much time, Phantom Damien said, checking his suit systems. The paradox cascade is already beginning. Soon, all timelines will start to collapse. Then we need to make a choice, Ren said, looking between both Damiens. Run, fight, or finally figure out how to break this loop without destroying the universe. Agent Damien pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and took a long drag. Any preferences? Well, she smiled that mysterious smile that had apparently captured his heart across multiple timelines. I've always been partial to option 3, but then again, I'm biased. I've seen how this plays out at least 17 times. And every time, It starts with a choice. She held out her hand. So, Agent Black, care to change the universe with me? Again? Time fractured around them as Admiral Damien's forces began breaking through the temple's temporal barriers. The walls shimmered with equations that seemed to shift and change, telling the story of countless attempts to solve an impossible paradox. "We've got company," Phantom Damien warned, his stealth suit detecting multiple temporal signatures. "And not just the Admiral. Looks like more versions of us are being drawn to this convergence point." Agent Damien watched as temporal rifts began opening throughout the temple. Through each one, he caught glimpses of himself, some older, some younger, all focused on the violet-skinned woman who had somehow become the center of his existence across multiple timelines. 17 versions of you, Ren said, her eyes glowing with temporal energy, all existing simultaneously. Do you know what that does to the fabric of reality? Besides giving me a headache? Damien rubbed his temples. Wait, 17. You kept saying that number. It's not random, is it? Finally, Phantom Damien grinned. He's starting to think like us. The temple walls cracked as another blast of temporal energy hit them. Through the growing fissures, they could see Admiral Damien's forces setting up temporal containment fields. 17 is a prime number, Agent Damien continued, the equations on the walls suddenly making more sense. In temporal mathematics, prime numbers represent stable points in the timeline, points where change is possible. And this, Ren gestured to the chaos around them, is the 17th iteration of our little loop, a potential breaking point. Or a point of total collapse, Phantom Damien added grimly, which is why the Admiral is so determined to stop us. He's you from iteration 16. He knows what's at stake. Another blast rocked the temple. Reality itself seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Through the rifts, more versions of Damien began stepping through, each one representing a different choice, a different attempt to solve the paradox. "We're out of time," Ren said, her voice urgent. 17 versions of you, all existing at once. It's too much strain on the timeline. We need to make a choice now. "What choice?" Agent Damien demanded. "Run? Fight? Neither seems to have worked out well so far." "Those aren't the only options," she smiled, taking his hand. "You wrote these equations for a reason. All of you did. Not to capture me, not to free me, but to understand what we are to each other." The temple shook again. Through the largest rift, they could see Admiral Damien preparing a final temporal blast that would collapse all timelines into one. "Every touch creates a new timeline," Agent Damien said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place. "But what if, instead of creating new branches, we merged them?" "Now you're thinking." Phantom Damien's suit began to glow as he interfaced with the temporal energy surrounding them. 17 versions, 17 prime points of possibility. All converging in one moment, Ren finished. She turned to Agent Damien. "But it has to be your choice. You're the latest iteration, the 17th version, the prime point where everything changes." The temple walls were dissolving now, reality bleeding through the cracks. Admiral Damien's voice boomed across time itself. "This ends now." "Yes," Agent Damien said, pulling Ren close. "It does." He kissed her. The world exploded in violet light as 17 timelines collapsed into one. 17 versions of Damien, each representing a different choice, a different path, merged into a single consciousness. Memories flooded through him, lives lived, choices made, failures and successes across multiple realities. When the light faded, they stood in a space between moments. The temple was gone. The mountain was gone. Even time itself seemed to hold its breath. "Well," Ren said, looking at him with those starlight eyes, "that's one way to break a temporal loop." "Did it work?" Damien asked, his head swimming with memories from 17 lifetimes. Look for yourself. He turned to see a single temporal rift remaining. Through it, he could see the Galactic Empire's temporal control center, but something was different. The equations on their screens were new, or rather, they were ancient, written on temple walls by 17 versions of himself across time. We didn't break the loop, he realized. We completed it. The perfect paradox, Ren agreed. The Empire's temporal control systems are based on equations you wrote in the past, which you learned from the future, which only existed because of those same equations. And us? We're temporal criminals now, she grinned, intertwining her violet fingers with his. The Empire won't take kindly to us rewriting their fundamental theories of time manipulation. Good thing I know a few tricks about avoiding temporal authorities, he smirked, pulling out his last cigarette. Any preference on where we run first? I hear the 1920s has excellent jazz, she said, taking the cigarette from his lips and kissing him again. The universe shifted around them, time and space bending to their will. Somewhere in the distance, temporal alarms began to sound. The hunt was on, but this time they were in it together. The smoky haze of a Chicago speakeasy swirled around them as Damien adjusted his bow tie. The year was 1924, and jazz filled the air with its rebellious rhythm. Ren sat at the piano, her violet skin somehow going unnoticed in the dim light. People in this era saw what they wanted to see, and right now they saw a stunning jazz singer with exotic looks. You know they're still hunting us, Damien said, lighting a cigarette as he leaned against the piano. Temporal enforcement doesn't give up easily. Let them hunt. Ren's fingers danced across the keys, playing a melody that wouldn't be written for another century. We've got time on our side, literally. The crowd at the Green Mill swayed to her music, unaware that the beautiful couple on stage had rewritten the laws of time itself. Damien watched her play, memories of 17 lifetimes mixing with the present moment. A flicker of temporal energy rippled through the room. Most patrons didn't notice, but Damien's enhanced senses, a gift from his merged timelines, picked it up instantly. Company? Ren asked without missing a beat. 3 agents by the bar, 2 more at the entrance. He took another drag of his cigarette. They're getting better at tracking us. Should we run? Nah, he grinned, pulling out his vintage temporal disruptor disguised as a flask. Let's give them a show. The first agent made his move during the piano solo. Damien caught the glint of a chronon pistol and acted instantly, throwing his cigarette with perfect accuracy. The temporal energy in the tobacco, specially modified for just such occasions, created a localized time bubble, freezing the agent mid-draw. Ladies and gentlemen, Ren announced to the crowd, her voice carrying that hint of otherworldly charm, please enjoy this special performance of Time After Time, about 90 years before it's supposed to be written. The temporal agents converged as Ren's fingers hit the keys, each note bending reality around them. Damien moved through the chaos with practiced ease, his movements a deadly dance choreographed across multiple timelines. You know, he called out while ducking under a temporal blast that aged a bottle of whiskey by 50 years. We could just settle down, buy a nice house, maybe see if that merged timeline of ours can produce some interesting offspring. Ren laughed, her music never faltering even as she kicked a chair into an agent's path. Are you proposing in the middle of a temporal firefight? Seemed appropriate, Damien grinned, using his disruptor to create a time loop that had 2 agents repeatedly walking into each other. We did meet while I was trying to arrest myself. The fight at the Green Mill became legend in temporal enforcement circles, though of course, officially, it never happened. By the time the dust settled, 5 agents were trapped in various temporal bubbles. The piano was playing itself backwards through time, and half the patrons were convinced they'd witnessed an elaborate magic show. "So," Wren said as they walked through the snowy Chicago streets afterward, her violet skin glowing under the gaslight, "about that proposal." "Who said anything about a proposal?" Damien lit a fresh cigarette, his breath mixing with the smoke in the cold air. "I was just thinking about the tactical advantages of a domestic cover story. 17 lifetimes and you're still terrible at this." She plucked the cigarette from his lips and took a drag herself. "But yes." "Yes what?" "Yes, I'll marry you, you temporal idiot." The next few years passed in what Damien called real time. No jumps, no loops, just living each moment as it came. They bought a brownstone in Chicago's Gold Coast, established themselves as musicians, and in 1926 welcomed twins, a boy and a girl, both with a slight violet tinge to their skin that most people assumed was a trick of the light. "Alexander and Aurora," Wren said, watching their children sleep. "I think they've inherited more than just my complexion." She was right. By age 5, the twins were unconsciously manipulating time, freezing cookies in mid-fall, rewinding broken toys to their pristine state, accidentally creating temporal duplicates during hide-and-seek. "They're going to need training," Damien said one night in 1932, watching Aurora reverse the aging of her favorite doll for the 3rd time that day. "The Empire will sense them eventually." "Then we'll train them ourselves," Wren replied. "After all, who better to teach temporal manipulation than the people who rewrote its fundamental laws?" Life settled into a pattern of domestic bliss punctuated by the occasional temporal incursion. They taught the twins to control their abilities, turned away imperial agents with increasingly creative uses of paradox, and watched as their children grew into their powers. But time, even for those who could manipulate it, moved forward. The years rolled by. World War II, where they might have helped the Allies more than history recorded. The Cold War, during which they definitely prevented several temporal assassination attempts. The space race, which Damien swore they didn't accelerate, though Wren's smile suggested otherwise. By 1980, their hair had grayed, but their love for temporal mischief hadn't dimmed. Alexander had become a quantum physicist, unknowingly advancing the very theories his father would use to create time travel. Aurora worked as a consulting detective, using her abilities to solve crimes by literally witnessing them in the past. Then came 2002, and with it, Damien's 78th birthday. "Getting slow, old man?" Wren teased as they sat on their brownstone's roof, sharing a bottle of wine that they'd aged 200 years in an instant. "Says the woman who was chained to a mountain for centuries," he retorted, his hair white but his eyes still sharp. "Any regrets?" "Just one," she said, looking at the Chicago skyline. "We never did finish that jazz set at the Green Mill." Before Damien could respond, the air crackled with familiar energy. A temporal rift opened above their roof, and through it fell a letter, written on imperial stationery, dated 3157. "Well," Damien said, picking up the envelope with a grin, "looks like retirement's over." "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Black," Damien read aloud, his weathered hands holding the futuristic paper. "Your presence is required to prevent the collapse of the multiverse. Again. P.S. Bring the twins." "It's about time," Wren said. Her violet skin barely aged despite the decades. "I was wondering when they'd figure out the Helios paradox was about to trigger." "The what now?" "Oh, right. That hasn't happened yet." She stood, stretching like a cat. "Remember that little temporal equation you left in the temple? The one about prime numbers and stable points? Which version of me wrote that? All of them, and none of them." Her eyes sparkled with that familiar mischief. "Let's just say the universe has a sense of humor about circular causality." Inside their brownstone, the phone rang. It was Alexander calling from his quantum lab at MIT. "Dad," he said, his voice excited, "you won't believe what we just discovered about temporal prime matrices." "Let me guess," Damien interrupted. "Something about 17 being a particularly unstable number?" "How did you—" "Never mind. Aurora's already on her way. She says she saw this coming 3 days ago." "Of course she did," Wren laughed. "She gets that from my side of the family. They gathered on the roof, the aging temporal fugitives and their temporally gifted children, 4 generations of paradox-made flesh. The Chicago night sparkled around them, and somewhere in the distance, jazz played." "So," Aurora said, her violet-tinged skin glowing in the moonlight, "ready to save reality one more time." "One more time." Damien pulled out his vintage temporal disruptor, now modified with 70 years of improvements. "Sweetheart, in our family there's no such thing as one more time. Time is more of a—" "Don't say it," Alexander groaned. "Suggestion," Damien finished with a wink at Wren. The temporal rift reopened above them, larger this time. Through it, they could see the familiar purple haze of Chronos 7, where it all began, or would begin, or had always been beginning. "Well," Wren said, taking Damien's hand, "shall we go break the universe again?" "After you, my love." He gestured toward the rift with an exaggerated bow. "Age before beauty." Says the man who's technically 17 different ages at once. As they stepped through the portal, Damien caught a glimpse of their reflection in a window, not as they were now, but as they would be again. A dashing temporal agent and a mysterious violet woman, eternally caught in the dance of time itself. The rift closed behind the Black family, leaving only the echo of laughter and the faint smell of cigarette smoke that seemed to come from another era. And in a quiet speakeasy in 1924, a piano began playing itself, waiting for its players to return. The end. But somewhere in the time stream, a new story was already beginning. Director Garp's hologram flickered to life in the pristine white corridor of Galactic Intelligence Headquarters. "Agent Black, we have a situation. The Phantom has surfaced again." A young agent looked up, cigarette dangling from his lips, and smiled. Because this time, he knew exactly who he was hunting, and more importantly, she was hunting him too. "Dear time traveler, you've just witnessed a story that exists in multiple temporal states simultaneously, much like that cigarette smoke that never quite fades from Damien's timeline. Perhaps you're reading this in 1924 or 3157 or somewhere in between. Perhaps you're reading it in all those moments at once. They say love transcends time, but sometimes time transcends itself to make way for love. If you ever find yourself in a Chicago speakeasy and hear a haunting melody that seems to come from both the past and the future, or if you catch a glimpse of violet skin in the crowd, well, you might just be experiencing a temporal overlap with the Black family's latest adventure. After all, in their universe, and perhaps in ours, time is more of a suggestion than a rule. Keep watching the shadows, and if you see the Phantom, do say hello. Just don't expect them to stay in one timeline long enough for coffee, until the next paradox. A temporal observer, last seen in timeline number 17,